Okay, Larry, if you don't mind jumping on video with me. Hey, how are you? Um, so to those who maybe didn't get my initial intro, this is Josephine. We call her JoJo or Joey, and she's going to be hanging out with us for the 20 or so minutes that we have for this interview. She just woke up from a nap. Unfortunately, she was planning to sleep all the way through, but decided to get up a little bit early. She's also stoked to be here. Uh, all right, so Larry, I guess before we jump in, my name is Andrew Farah. I'm co-founder and CEO of a company called Density. We build systems that measure in real time how buildings are being used. So we make buildings aware of the people in them. Um, Today we have Larry Charlip from Take Two, which is an awesome company in its own right, and we have no breaking news about GTA 6 during this call. But Larry graciously offered to spend some time with me and Joe and talk to us a little bit about his work in facilities and workplace and some of the strategies of going back to office. Larry, can you really briefly, what's your name? What's your background? How'd you get into workplace? And then we'll jump in.
Sure. Larry Charlip, I'm Vice President of Facilities Management and Corporate Real Estate for Take-Two Interactive. We are the parent company to Rockstar and 2K Games, as well as a few others. And I've been in facilities, office services, and corporate real estate for about 28 years now. Started out as a mail clerk for a commodities trading company back in the early 1990s, and have kind of done everything through the industry since then, ending up here at this incredible company to work for. It's been really exciting.
Um, so Take Two has a pretty unique model. We were talking a little bit about how labels work and um, actually, before we jump into the specifics, situate the audience a little bit. Total square footage, number of offices or number of regions that you're supporting, and the big question is, are your offices open and are people back?
Sure. So Take-Two has approximately 1.2 million square feet worldwide, about 48 offices. That's a rough number. It changes regularly, mostly in North America, Europe, and Asia. And are our offices open? The short answer is yes. Bigger question, I think we'll get into this a little bit more, is to what extent. So yes, and we have employees coming back. The numbers vary by region depending on what's happening, and right now it's purely voluntary.
Gotcha. Um, so Take Two has a unique model. You have essentially a series of business units that operate underneath the Take Two umbrella. And that's largely, I think, because of the structure of how game design and development works. Can you talk a little bit about just how that works and who makes decisions about office space allocation, what to open when, what capacity, that type of thing?
Sure. So we are decentralized. So our business units, or our labels, as we call them, have some autonomy to them, and they can make those decisions on their own. From a corporate level, and Take Two is just a corporate parent. We don't do development ourselves. From a corporate level, we set guidelines and parameters, and they need to come back to us for full approval in order to reopen, to what level, and to do different things, including acquiring office space, expanding office space. They get to make those decisions locally within their P&L and their business unit. And my job is to make sure that it fits into the corporate structure, the corporate
And so you're making
objective.
recommendations.
Yeah,
You're like, here's sort of like best practices, or here are two or three options you choose from these things. Like, but ultimate end decision on square feet per head, assigned, unassigned,
is
total
made on an
number.
office by office basis.
I
Yeah.
mean, how many labels are there?
Well, there's about 48 offices, and to some extent, each one gets to make their own decision, even
Mm,
within, take the Take Two name. We allow each one to make their own decisions. So about 48, but and they roll up to probably about 5 different management streams between the 48. I see my job as being the subject matter expert and a resource to all of them to make sure that we're all making the best decision possible. And then
sure.
obviously from a procurement standpoint, utilizing our size.
What are the upsides and the downsides of a decentralized real estate strategy, particularly in a pandemic?
Yeah, so the upside of it is, each of these offices and each of these studios has their own culture. So you walk into a Take-Two office in Paris, you're in Paris in a Take-Two office, not a Take-Two office that happens to be in Paris. You walk into Firaxis studio that makes strategic games. That's the facility that you're in. You're in Visual Concepts. They make sports games. You're in that kind of facility. So they build their own culture, and that's a huge positive. And from a creative standpoint, that gives them ownership. The challenges, particularly during the pandemic, is
Yeah. Layer on a pandemic.
yeah,
What does that mean? I mean, like, how do you? There's like a point at which, hey, this is best practice for safety, wanders into, no, this is required for
yeah,
safety. So, do you sort of have like a red line of sorts where it's like anywhere within this band is okay, but as you start to wander into certain areas, that then becomes centralized, or
yeah,
how do you think about safety
yeah.
within the context?
So ultimately, for them to do anything right now, as far as reopening as far as reopening, anything they want to do has to come back and be approved by the corporate group that is overseeing the COVID response, which I'm part of. What we tend to do for everything, and we're doing it for this situation as well, is setting guidelines and parameters. So we're setting what minimum cleaning specs have to be, and they're on a tiered level depending on level of opening and all that kind of stuff.
What are those? I would say one of the things, and I know you and I have talked about this, but this particular audience loves sort of practical applications. Like, what are some of the standards around cleaning?
Yeah. So, while our offices were completely shut down, we still maintained cleaning in our space, and we required our offices to continue to maintain nightly cleaning, all high touch points, weekly cleaning of every individual workspace, things of that nature. As we start to return people, we tick that up to another level, right? So, our high touch points go up. We have more cleaning during the day while people are in the office. We have staff there cleaning all of the high touch points. We step up, knowing who's in the office, cleaning those workspaces. We are in in all of our offices currently, we are assigned seating. We don't have flex seating. There is talk in some offices about going to flex, and
All
that adds
labels,
challenges.
all labels are currently assigned seating.
Currently,
You have a
yes.
desk.
Yep, everybody has a desk. Now,
Let's.
some
Sorry,
are
go ahead.
looking to make a change to flex, but that changes our structure as to how we clean, how we support them. There's a lot of things that have to go into that, so it's not a decision we can make overnight.
Sure.
Not everybody's standardized on technologies. Everybody has a different setup at their desk. If we go to that, we need to change our technology setup, storage, and cleaning. If I'm at a desk today and you're at a desk tomorrow, that desk has to be fully sanitized tonight. If I'm at the desk today and I'm here tomorrow, it has to be cleaned, but it doesn't have to be fully sanitized. There's a difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. Talk to me a little bit about the perception of safety and actual safety. So, cleaning a space, cleaning it a number of times, and we try to ask this question of most of our guests, which is, how are you communicating what you're doing? How are you incentivizing folks to come back to office? Do you care about incentivizing folks to come back to office? How important is that to your culture? I think you'd made a comment that Take Two is pretty office focused for a portion pre-pandemic. So curious how you're thinking about what's to come.
So yeah, we've been office first, pre-pandemic, and our chairman has been on television saying we plan to be office first going forward as well. That doesn't mean we're not going to allow more flexibility moving forward, and that we might not rethink, does everybody need to be in the office all the time?
Hmm.
But I think predominantly we will be. Right now, everything is voluntary, so nobody is forced to come back to the office. So our labels are sending out employee sentiment surveys on a regular basis, because those are a snapshot in time and they're very emotional depending on what's going on at that moment. What we see for the most part, and it's not just that Take Two, but with other peers that I talk with in the industry, the main concerns with coming back to the office aren't necessarily the safety in the office. It's transportation and childcare, right? You're seeing that right now, right? So, I
Yeah,
think as
totally.
those start to to get clearer. If people feel safer getting to the office. Right now, when we ask people if they want to come to the office, they have to sign up, they have to go through training, and we ask them not to take public transportation. They need to be able to either commute by themselves, or commute via car or walk or bike or something like that, depending on where they are. But we're asking them not to take public transportation. So I think until those things free up, we're not going to have any grander opening. I mean, I don't think any of
Sure.
our offices are any more than 50% at this time. And actually, several of them we've rolled back because numbers have ticked up in particularly like Eastern Europe.
Rolled back is in
The
limited
numbers of
capacity,
people,
further limited capacity.
correct. So
Gotcha.
we have plans at, of office occupancy at 25%, 50%, 75%. And those are kind of our thresholds. We'll work
Sure.
between them. But, I don't think we have anybody approved for more than 50% at the moment. And like I said, several offices in Eastern Europe we've rolled them back. Even Western Europe, we've rolled them back. Asia is probably the most open of all of them.
Yeah, certainly. Where to take this? I've got like a number of questions. I also have a baby that's rolling around a countertop. What percentage of your employees think they might work from home into perpetuity? Or let's bucket that with the same number of employees that might fall into, I only want to show up maybe 2 days a week.
Yeah, I think if it's hard for me to say because I haven't seen our most recent employee surveys across our portfolio. But I think if you would have asked me that question 10 months ago, 9 months ago, when we first started surveying people, it was probably 70% of the people said, "Oh no, I don't need to go back to the office." I think now we're probably
Sure. The challenges of being a full-time parent, a full-time educator, full-time colleague start to get in the.
Yeah, I think people were really excited about it at first, right? And they were like, "Oh, this is great. I'm a little bit more flexible." It wears on you after a while, right? I mean, I have a grown adult child at home and stuff like that, and I hate, I don't like working from home all that much. I like coming into the office. So I think the last numbers I've seen are probably within 20% still feel like it's they're either they want to work from home or they're in that 1 to 2 day a week range. More people are more flexible to the 3-4 days a week in the office is what I'm saying.
Gotcha. Let's imagine for a moment that there's a customer that we were talking to, or a partner that we were talking to that was coming back, and their expectation was that they were going to grow from something like 5 or 6% fully remote or strong hybrid to upwards of 40% across their entire, and they have 6,000 or 7,000 employees. If that were to happen to Take-Two, and I'm going to give her a bottle in a second, I promise. If that were to happen, what would you do with your real estate strategy? And also, I see some comments or questions coming in. If you have questions, please toss them in the Q&A, and I'll make sure to incorporate them.
Yeah. So what would that mean to our real estate strategy? That's an interesting question because for the most part on the development side, we don't intertwine different labels together. So different labels might have development offices in the same city. Would we ever consider combining them because we now have excess space? We might think about that. We haven't really had that discussion internally because, to be honest with you, we are in a tremendous growth situation, and we're continuing to take on additional space. So we aren't talking about consolidation or reallocating real estate at the moment, and I don't foresee that happening in the near future. I think our portfolio is going to continue to grow. And to be honest with you, for all the news, some of the big tech companies, and I'm not going to call out names, but for a lot of the news that the big tech companies are making about letting their employees work remotely, those are the same companies that are doing the biggest deals through COVID on the real estate side.
I know. It's amazing. It's like at the same time that we're talking about a massive shift in remote support and hybrid work, biggest buyers of real estate right now are tech companies.
Yeah. One of those companies, one of the biggest tech companies in the world, just took over 1.5 million square feet of office space in Manhattan to go on top of their 1.5 million they already had. So, and they were one of the ones that said in 5 years, we're going to be 70% remote. So
I think, so I guess what do you take away from that? Is it that it's duplicitous, or is it that it's long-term thinking? We're buying when there's a dip in cost, and we know that we're going to grow 5 years from now, so we're sort of planning for that. Because the reality is, if you look at tech companies today, most tech companies are really small from a real estate portfolio relative to the traditional. I mean, you look at IBM, Verizon, these biggies. We're talking, close to 100 million square feet of space, whereas with the tech companies, it's much closer to the 1 to 12, depending on, and those are high growth companies.
Yep. So I think there's a couple of things in play here. One is that I think COVID has kind of put the brakes on densification. So people are taking more square foot per employee. And we're certainly seeing that on some of our ends as well. We're planning for, while we think we will get to a point where we don't need to have every employee 6 feet apart, we are planning to some extent de-densify in certain areas.
Are you pulling
Um,
seats out of conference rooms?
we just through COVID, but our plan is to bring them back.
I see.
Um,
Yeah, sure.
so again, that falls into our amenity spaces, and our conference rooms fall into that 25, 50, and 75% capacities as well, right?
Hmm.
So we will
It's
up
all
those
space
as
types. It's not just the
all
building.
space
It's
types.
floor, room,
Correct.
open space. Yeah.
Correct. And we not to plug you guys intentionally, but we did just roll out density to help us with that in our conference rooms and our lounge spaces, uh, to help keep track of that capacity, and to make people aware of it.
Yeah.
So and we're piloting that here in New York. But so yes, all spaces. The second part of the space grab is, I think, the way people work and the way we design our spaces is going to change. It had already started. Take Two for the last 5 years we've been developing our space more from a hospitality standpoint than
Right.
a traditional office standpoint, and I think you're going to continue to see that. We did that 5 years ago with our headquarters here in New York, and we're continuing to do that. And when we hire architects, we're hiring more and more hospitality driven architects than your traditional office space. That takes up a lot of space. When you start talking about different ways for people to work and giving them different types of spaces, those take up big chunks of space, and you need the room
But
for
that's the
this.
trade-off, right? Is like, if you move to unassigned and you have you can increase your ratio of, let's say I'm showing up 2 days a week, you're showing up 3 days a week. You can essentially use the same space to support multiple folks. So I, and I'm sort of curious your perspective on this. Every company that I've talked to who is thinking about hoteling or hospitality as a model for office design
Mhm.
is migrating large swaths of their portfolio to unassigned seating. I tend not to hear that you can do assigned quite as well if you're trying to do sort of the hospitality portion. I mean, you have common areas, but just sort of curious how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, we're rethinking it is the answer, and we haven't quite gotten the answer to that yet. Because right now we're assigned seating with hospitality spaces, with meeting booths, with lounge spaces, with large pantries.
Sure.
Um, and it's to give our employees that head down space, that dedicated head down space, plus other areas to work in, or other areas just to get away from the head down, even if it's relaxing space. um, so we're rethinking that. We haven't gotten the sense from our employees, or even from our business leaders or department leaders, that they're interested in moving away from assigned seating, but they are interested in having more collaboration spaces with the assigned seating, so that they can do both at the same,
Sure.
both throughout the day. One of the other things that keeps getting talked about is the office as a destination. And we haven't quite gotten there, right? So, like, my London office will have one kind of setup, because this is the work we do there. And when I'm in London, I know how I'm going to work there. And if I'm in Montreal, I know how I'm going to work there. We haven't quite gotten there, and I'm not sure on the gaming side that we are, because
Hmm.
technology is so specialized when
Yeah.
you do certain things.
I want to pull in a few questions that came in, particularly around uh, HVAC. You've actually been on top of this, I think, for longer than most folks. The question is sort of given that COVID mainly spreads through the air, what are the steps that you have or will you be taking to address, whether that's like masks in motion, requiring masks either in motion or throughout your stay at an office, improved air filtration, MERV 13 or better, sort of how are you thinking about that? And then there's, I think sort of a second part of that question is, how do folks maybe who don't have the resources of a Take-Two, who are rapidly growing, like nonprofits, do you have sort of an opinion on how they can address some of the costly endeavors of implementing or changing HVAC systems
Sure.
or improving them?
So, first of all, we are requiring masks in the office. There's conversation as to at what percentage of vaccination do we allow people without masks, but I'm fully vaccinated. I'm allowed to be in my office with no mask on, but as soon as I walk out of my office or somebody comes into my office, my mask has to go on. We will continue to do that. And right now, there's conversation, but we'll follow CDC and WHO guidelines towards
Are you
that.
going to require folks to be vaccinated? Sorry, I just had a thought.
Yeah, so the short answer is I don't think so. That's a conversation, and that's a legal employment conversation
Sure.
that I'm not. I hear from the sidelines, but right now it doesn't sound like we're interested in making people get vaccinated. But we are making any resources available we can for those who do want to get vaccinated, and we are encouraging people to get vaccinated.
Yeah. Sorry, I cut
So
you off.
then, talking about the HVAC side of it, I've always been a proponent throughout my career of regular HVAC maintenance. So most companies I've worked for, I've always had monthly maintenance schedules for HVAC, and we do that here at Take-Two.
Can you clarify what that means with maintenance? Like what does that
Yeah,
mean
we do
from a safety standpoint?
Yeah, so we have our HVAC vendors in on a monthly basis to change filters, clean screens, all of the typical preventive maintenance that you would do, change belts, check leaks, all that kind of stuff. We do that on a monthly basis for pretty much all of our offices. And I've been a proponent of that for a long time. Some companies do it bi-monthly or every other month. Some companies do it quarterly. I've always come to it from a standpoint of it makes your equipment last longer. It wasn't really about, at that time, it wasn't about air quality, but and we've always used the highest MERV filters we could, and that was from an air quality standpoint. They throw out the number, the MERV 13 and all that kind of stuff. Some equipment just can't handle MERV 13; it's too restrictive, right? So MERV 12 is not that far off. But we've been doing that for a long time, and I recommend with MERV, the higher the MERV number, the more expensive the filters are, but it's worth it, particularly for your indoor air quality. And that's been a huge topic through sustainability and all fit well and all that kind of those kind of certifications. So if you're doing any of that, you want to be on top of those to begin with. So we've been there, and that's part of our guidelines to our offices to make sure that they are meeting those requirements, getting as close to MERV 13 as they can, monthly cleaning of their air conditioning units. In some locations, we're putting in the infrared lights in air conditioning, but some places it's just not feasible, particularly if you're on a building air conditioning system. For smaller companies, if you're leasing space particularly multi-tenant buildings, but if you're leasing space, my recommendation would be to partner with your landlord. There's ways to help offset those costs, particularly if they're doing it for multiple tenants. But at the end of the day, we need to be talking about the safety and the wellness of our employees, and that's with COVID or without COVID, right? Take-Two is embarking on a sustainability program as well, and we're installing indoor air quality sensors in different offices and benchmarking. So you need to be thinking about the wellness of your employees, whether it's COVID or it's not. And landlords, a lot of landlords are on those paths as well, so they're happy to partner.
So we have an upset baby. She kind of bonked her head. Can you tell me a little bit about unused or underutilized space? Do you think that you'll be downsizing some of your leases?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to be downsizing. We don't really have underutilized space. Like I said, Take Two, we've been fortunate over the last 8 years to be in a tremendous growth cycle, and we're continuing to grow. We might look at, are we growing in the right places, and are we allocating our resources properly? But right now we don't have any underutilized spaces, that in most of our locations. It's going to be interesting as people start coming back to see what they are using and where they feel comfortable being within our spaces. But
Sure.
prior to this, you know gym space and lounge space has all been utilized. Office meeting space has been a premium, so we're going to see how that gets used going forward. We don't know until we get people back in the office.
So I'm going to have to deal with Joe a bit. But what I wanted to ask, about the future. If you can kind of snap your fingers and you get the buildings you've always wanted, what are those?
Yeah, I think hospitality is really where it's going. And we had seen a lot of landlords, particularly in major cities, start to add hospitality spaces to their buildings, so their tenants didn't have to necessarily build them, and so that their smaller tenants, like the nonprofits and stuff, can get use of them. I think we're going to see that more and more going forward. You know, are we going to have the Google office with all the video, with all the video games and all that all over the place? Maybe not, but I think hospitality is going to continue to drive what we build, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's really the way we should be working, because as we do more and more studies of our employees and just how people work, and from generation to generation it changes, and what works well for me doesn't work for the person next to me, and we should have spaces and be inclusive of all of our employees. So inclusive design is going to be a huge thing that comes out of COVID as well. And inclusive design is more than just being ADA compliant.
Like what? What does that mean?
Being aware of gender identification, being aware of mental health. Those are important, and those are important to our employees, to millennials and whatever's next. That's what's going to bring those employees back to the office. Those who have sensitivities around being in large groups and stuff and want to work heads down, or those who are extroverts and want to work around other people, and those who want to be recognized for how they identify, and they want to do that in the workplace and feel comfortable doing that. I think it's going to be important, and it's going to be the way we design our space going forward.
That's great. There are a few more questions that I'm actually going to allow Dave maybe to jump on and close out with. Larry, it was awesome to spend some time with you. Thank you so much for being patient with me.
No problem.
Folks, it was great to spend some time with you all, and thank you all for the time. Dave, thanks a lot.
Yeah, of course.
See you later. See you later.
Yeah. So sometimes we all kind of hit that 4 p.m. slump. So I guess Joey is as well. But
one of the things I actually love about working from home is
yeah, hopefully my dog doesn't start barking. But no, I really appreciate your perspective on kind of the future and what COVID will kind of push you towards changing. Do you see like COVID as a change agent, kind of like for everybody, kind of thinking either smarter spaces or better like tracking like employee data to kind of make smarter spaces?
Yeah, I use the term accelerator. I think COVID's an accelerator, not it's. I think a lot of these changes were happening pre-COVID, but slowly, and COVID kind of flipped the switch on it, and made us speed everything up. Right, people were working from home pre-COVID, large groups of people. I actually heard somebody speak at a New York event talking about New York in particular, where they said, from 2010 to 2020, New York City added 1 million jobs. There were 1 million jobs added to the city of New York, but there isn't the building infrastructure to support that. So work from home was already started. And in order for that growth to continue in New York, more work from home was going to happen. COVID has accelerated that. And those companies who have management who weren't in favor of work from home are now, because they thought it wasn't going to be as productive. And I do think we're starting to see a tail off in productivity, but still could be very productive working from home, at least on a part-time basis. And I think so. I think it's, like I said, it's an accelerator.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we see the same kind of thing, and even if our own team, we kind of see that, like, COVID has presented a certain type of I don't mean to say this in any type of way, but kind of accelerated people's consideration of where they want to live, and how necessary is the office to have their professional roles. So kind of changing subjects a little bit, a lot of companies struggle with really underutilized conference rooms. And if I'm repeating anything Andrew said, hopefully you just tell me that. But a lot of companies struggle with completely underutilized rooms, and some companies struggle with completely overly used conference rooms where people are wandering around looking for spaces to gather. How does Take Two kind of manage that in their offices now, or in your offices? And then how do you see that? Do you see that evolving over the next 12, 18 months or so?
Yeah, so we touched a little bit on it before. We talked about, what would we do with underutilized space, and I'm not sure that we really have all that much of that, but it's going to be interesting to see how people utilize our space coming back. We have room booking systems in place. We use different systems depending on what office, but we are trying to standardize on Zoom rooms moving forward. So we'll continue to use that. I mentioned earlier that in New York, we are piloting density. And that was a project we embarked on just before COVID hit, but didn't get installed until middle of COVID. It actually changed our strategy. COVID changed our strategy. We weren't initially putting it in all of our conference rooms and bathrooms and stuff like that, and we are now. And that's more to monitor percentages or numbers of people through COVID, right? As we restrict the numbers, right? So I walk into the bathroom, it's 50% capacity, or it's 2 people is capacity, and I walk in, it shows 50%. If somebody else walks in, it tells them to stop. So what I think, we at Take Two embarked on a data and information collection path pre-COVID, but at that time it was really about just collecting data, right? And seeing what data we can get, and then trying to figure out what to do with it. I think what COVID has done is given us the opportunity to start to figure out what it is we want to do with that data that we're collecting, even before we collected it, right? Because we installed these sensors and we weren't getting any data, right? We have 12 people in an office for 400 today, so there's not a lot of data there, but it gives me the opportunity to start to look at people's movements and understand, okay, what is this starting to show me? Which floors are more occupied, what areas, where do people go for coffee, stuff like that, which, like I said, when we first started, it was just about let's collect data and figure out what we're going to do with it. Now we're figuring out why we want to collect that data.
Sure. No, that's really interesting.
And we'll use that for future design.
Yeah, well, actually, that was going to be my next question. So with the offices cleared out, when you're looking at 12 people in a space that's for 400 or whatever, however many, do you see the opportunity to kind of explore different solutions? I'm not talking specifically about density, but just in general, either redesigning spaces or implementing technology without being as worried about design standards for buildings and interiors of offices. Do you have that opportunity to kind of test things out, as you just said?
Yeah, during this time, we've implemented, we started implementing an IWMS system. So being able to install a space and move system and actually test it out without having high demand is a great thing to do, right? Because it kind of allows you to roll up on it rather than, it go live and then tomorrow you've got 40 moves you need to do, and you see whether or not the system works.
Sure,
right?
And displacing people to install things, like you move people out of the office so they can.
Yeah. Oh yeah, when we did our density installation, we were able to do it during working hours. We wouldn't have been able to do that prior to COVID. We're changing to Zoom rooms, and that's going to be done during working hours. And we would never have been able to block out 12 conference rooms to do that in 3 days. It would have taken us 4 weekends to do it.
Yeah, no, that's a lot. And another thing that we hear from companies a lot are people when they're expanding their teams and they're hiring out, and especially remote, they'll kind of start utilizing co-working spaces to see whether or not that's going to be a hub where they need to actually invest in an office. Do you use any co-working spaces or vendors like DeskPass or
Yeah. So we use several co-working vendors, Regis, WeWork, and some smaller ones, One Piece out in San Francisco. And generally we use them either for a location where we might have only 1 or 2 employees, because we need to have a presence there, like Taiwan or Russia, Switzerland, things like that. Or we have a location where we're starting up operations and we need to get a dozen or so people into a space before fitting out a traditional office.
Sure.
So we have done that. We do actually have one business unit who, at least for the time being, is going to continue to work out of what we would call co-working space, but more through the managed office model, where they have dedicated suite, but it's managed by a WeWorks or something like that. Security is a high factor for us. So traditional co-working doesn't always work for us because we have some really strict security requirements. So we're more interested in those locations that can offer us suites that we could secure ourselves.
Cool. And actually, one more question, because we're almost at the 40, so we can start to wrap this. But you mentioned before being inclusive and being cognizant of ADA standards and gender identity and just inclusive in the office space. Do you find, we talk a lot about privacy at Density, where it's really important to the way we think about technology. I might have missed this when you were talking to Andrew, but how do you feel about privacy in prop tech and in IoT? Do you like cameras being around the office, or do you see that as a problem or something to work towards?
I think there's a simple solution to it, and that is, so our philosophy for security is, we aren't necessarily looking at office space or workspaces. We're looking at entry and exit points and things like that, right? So we aren't watching people work. There's a lot of tools, and mostly your online tools and everything on the internet. Nothing protects privacy, but it was important for us when we were putting in space sensors that they be, that they not identify people, that there's no data being collected. So we're very, everything that we do, anything that we connect to our network starts off with our internet security review team. And that's the first thing they look at is what data is being collected. So it's very important for us. We have to be careful of our business, and we have to be protective of our business, but we also have to be protective of our employees' information and data, and that's important to me. So I don't want to, and from a facilities standpoint, I don't think there's a whole lot that I need to know about you to make the space work for you, other than how do you work and how do you want to work and what do you want to do, right? I don't need to know your background. I don't need to know about your personal life. I don't need any of that information unless you want to share that. But we can figure out how to make it inclusive. And if we set out to make it inclusive of everybody out there and not necessarily look at who is in our space, then anybody we bring in should feel comfortable here.
That's great. Well, I appreciate the perspective, and thanks for talking with us, and thanks everybody for joining us. And Larry, it was just really great to hear from you.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
For everybody listening, we have more webinars coming up. Feel free to go to our website, and we'll have a follow-up link where you can rewatch this and sign up for the next one as well. So anyway, thank you, Larry, and thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you very much.